Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be learning about how to find the volume of a cylinder, and we will also include some real world problems and how to find volume. First, let's review what the formula is. So to find the volume of a cylinder, that formula is equal to pi times radius squared times height. And if we look at our diagram here, we can see the radius, remember with a circle. The radius is from the center to the edge. And then do you remember what it's called if we go from one edge to the other? Hopefully you said diameter. So diameter is all the way across a circle. Radius is halfway across. So we need the radius in this case. And then that is multiplied by height. And then pi, if you recall from our circles unit, pi is an irrational number. And a lot of times we abbreviate that to represent 3.14. Okay, now it is your guys' turn to go ahead and work on a matching activity in Nearpod to review circles and all the important vocab with it. Let's go ahead and start our practice with finding the volume. If you look in the upper right here, we have our formula. So if you haven't taken a chance yet to add that to your list, make sure you do so and label it with volume of a cylinder. This is our formula. What is the volume of this given figure? We are being told to use 3.14 as our approximation for pi and round our answer, if necessary, to the nearest tenth. So first, let's go ahead and label our information. I see right here, this is part of our circle. So the top of our cylinder makes up a circle from the center to the edge is 4 millimeters, and that is our radius. And then the height of the cylinder, that's how tall it is 15 millimeters. Now that our information is labeled, we are going to substitute. We're going to plug our numbers into our formula. So volume is equal to pi, but we're using the approximation of 3.14 as pi. That is being multiplied by our radius squared. So 4 squared, and then multiplied by our height. Now, in this problem, we don't have pure multiplication. We have an exponent involved. Therefore, we do need to follow the order of operations and make sure we deal with our exponent first, then we can move on to multiplication. With our exponent, we have 4 squared. Remember that 4 squared means 4 times itself 2 times. So 4 times 4, which would be 16, and then that's multiplied by 15. This is a standard. This is a topic where you are allowed to use a calculator. The numbers are pretty large. You do have permission to do so. Now that we are all down to pure multiplication, we can go ahead and do that. So we're going to multiply 3.14 times 16 times 15. And we do not have to round our answer. And honestly, the reason why is because we already rounded our pi. We already approximated that. Our volume of this cylinder is 753 and 6/10. And of course, don't forget your label. What would our label be? Cubic millimeters or millimeters cubed. It's the same thing. And remember, our answer for volume always needs to be cubed because we have a 3-dimensional figure. So in this case, we are multiplying 3 things. We're multiplying the radius twice, radius squared, and then the height. So that does still equal up to 3 parts. Let's do one more problem together. A cylindrical giant ocean tank at the aquarium is 24 feet deep and has a radius of 18 8/10 feet. Find the volume of the tank. Use pi is equal to 3.14 and round your answer to the nearest hundredth. Okay, first off, let's find our information. We are told that it has a radius of 18 and 8/10 feet, and then a height of 24 feet deep. Excuse that typo. And once again, we are using our approximation as pi. We have all our information pointed out. Let's substitute it into our formula so we can solve. We don't know volume. That stays the letter V because that's what we're trying to find. We're using 3.14 for pi. Our radius is 18 and 8/10. And remember, in our formula, our radius has to be squared. And then multiplied by our height, which is 24. Now that it's substituted, we can go forth and solve this for volume. Well, we need to work on simplifying that side. We have to follow order of operations. Exponents comes first. So make sure that you do the exponent first, otherwise your answer will be all messed up. So 18.8 squared means 18.8 times itself twice. So 18.8 times 18.8. We get 353 and 44 hundredths. Now we're all down to simply multiplication. So we can just multiply straight across. Remember, you do have permission to use a calculator. I am. So our volume is 26,635 and then 2384. Do we need to round this time? Yeah, we do. We had a couple different decimals involved, so that increased us here. And we are rounding to the nearest hundredth. So remember, the nearest hundredth is the second decimal place. So if that's what we're rounding to, we need to look at the next number. We need to look next door to see whether we round up or whether we round down. So is this 8 going to cause us to round up or down? The 8's greater than 5, so we're going to round up, which means the volume is 26,635 and 24 hundredths feet cubed. All right, it is your turn to practice. So go ahead and move on to the next slide and do so. Okay, now let's do a few more problems. Let's see what is a little different about this one. We still want to find the volume, but do you notice anything different about our diagram here? Hopefully you noticed that they did not give us radius. Remember, with a circle, radius is only half the distance. What they gave us was diameter. They gave us the full distance. If the diameter is 10, what would be the radius? Well, your radius is half the diameter. Therefore, our radius is half of 10, which would be 5. And then our height is simply 11 feet. So sometimes you may have that extra step to take, so always be careful, don't rush. Look at the problem closely to see whether or not they gave you diameter or radius. Let's go ahead and substitute and solve. So volume is equal to pi, which we're still using 3.14 as our approximation, times our radius, which is 5 squared, and then our height of 11. Let's follow order of operations. Make sure we do our exponents first. What would be 5 squared? Hopefully you said 25. Now we're just down to pure multiplication. So we can type that into our calculator to find our volume. The volume of this figure is 863 and 5/10 millimeters cubed. It is already rounded for us. We don't need to do any extra steps. Let's go ahead and try one more, and then you'll get another chance to practice. A standard size bass drum has a diameter of 22 inches and is 18 inches deep. Find the volume of the drum. Use pi is equal to 3.14 and round your answer to the nearest hundredth. All right, it is particularly important in word problems to make sure you identify your information. It's a little bit less straightforward than looking at a picture. Oh, when we read this, I notice that it gives me a diameter of 22 inches, but what I need is the radius. How can I find the radius? Radius is half of your diameter. So half, or dividing by 2, of 22 would be 11 inches. Our radius is 11. And if it's 18 inches deep, that means it is 18 inches tall. That would be our height. And we are being asked to find the volume and continuing with our pattern of using the approximation 3.14 for pi. All right, all of our information is labeled. Let's substitute and solve. Volume stays a variable. That's what we're trying to find. 3.14 is our approximation for pi. Radius squared, and our height. What's the first step? Exponents always have to follow that order of operations. What would be 11 squared? 121. If you don't have those, you'll find out in a little bit, they're called perfect squares. If you don't have those memorized, like 5 squared, 6 squared, 11 squared, that's a good thing to start working on now. It'll help you out in the future unit. Times 18. All right, we're down to just straight multiplication. You are allowed to use that calculator. 3.14 times 121 times 18. Our volume is 6,838 and 92 hundredths. It needs to be rounded to the nearest hundredth, so we're perfect. And of course, our label, inches cubed. All right, once again, it's your turn to practice, so go ahead and move on and try some yourself. Okay, we are now in our last set here. What happens when you are given the volume and you need to find either the height or the radius? Let's find out. A cylinder has a height of 12 meters. The volume is 3,768 cubic meters. What is the radius of the cylinder? And we're going to use 3.14 for pi. Even though we are being asked to find the radius instead, our first 2 steps are the same. We identify our information, donezo, substitute into your equation. Let's do that now. Our volume is no longer a variable because we know what it is. Our volume is 3,768. That is equal to pi, which is 3.14, times our radius squared. That is our unknown amount. That's going to stay a variable. And then that is and then our height. Now, in this case, we need to solve our equation here. We need to find radius. Normally, we start with exponents, but can I deal with my exponents? No, because our exponent is with our variable. Therefore, we got to work on isolating that variable first. Then we can deal with our exponent. Remember from Monday when we talked about the fact that you can multiply in any order when it is straight multiplication. Therefore, we can go ahead and multiply 3.14 and 12 to work on simplifying that side of our equation. What would be 3.14 times 12? That is 37 and 68/100 times radius squared. All right, we've simplified all we can. Now we need to try to start isolating that variable. Solve our equation. Remember, solving equations is all about doing the inverse, all about doing the opposite. So right now we have multiplication. To get rid of that, we do the opposite, the inverse of multiplication, which is division. So 3,768 divided by 37 and 68/100 means 100 is equal to radius squared. All right, we're almost there. But this is radius squared. Our question just wants us to find the radius only. There are two ways you can go about doing this. One way is just using mental math, using like a guess and check method, saying, okay, what squared, so what number times itself would give me 100? And that number is small enough that some of you might be able to figure that out. But if you're not able to, that is when you can go ahead and use a calculator, because we're going to continue with that theme of opposites. Just like multiplication and division are opposites, the opposite of an exponent, the opposite of squaring a number would be to take the square root. So you can take the square root of 100 and it would give you the answer. All right, let me show you real quick how to do that on a calculator in case you're not sure where that button is. Okay, here we are on Desmos. It is my favorite online calculator. If you look up here at the top, you can get to it by going to desmos.com/scientific, or you could even just go to Google and type in Desmos Scientific Calculator, and it'll bring you right here. When you look at your calculator, whether you're using this one or one on your phone, I know for me, if I use my phone, I have to turn it sideways to get it to be Scientific Calculator. Let me change color so it's easier to see. Right here are our two buttons for taking the square root. So this first one allows you to take the square root, which is all we would need for this assignment because it's always radius squared. The other one right next to it would allow you to take cube roots or fourth roots, fifth roots, etc. So if we want to find the square root of 100, we would simply click that button, type in 100, and the answer is 10. If we want to double check our work, that makes sense because 10 squared, 10 times 10 is 100. So if you get really large numbers that you're not sure how to do in your head, or you're just not quite comfortable with that yet, take the square root and you can use the calculator to do so. All right, so our drawings got cleared, but we just found out on that previous screen that the answer to this is 10. So the radius of this cylinder was 10 meters. Let's do one more. A cylinder has a radius of 8 1/10 meters. Its volume is 885.86622 cubic meters. What is the height of the cylinder? Use pi as the approximation 3.14 and round your answer to the nearest hundredth. All right, this time, similar because we're trying to find the volume, only this time we are given the radius and we are being asked to find the height. Even though it's just a wee bit different, our steps are very similar. We identify our important information, and then we substitute into our formula. All right, all of our important information has been identified. Let's substitute. Our volume, whew, that's a big number with a lot of decimals. My caution to you guys is because it's common to get some really big numbers here because once you start squaring, once you start multiplying, your numbers increase rapidly. Always make sure that you typed it in correctly into your calculator correctly, because it would be very easy to miss a 6 or miss a 2 when you have duplicates. So always just take your time, double check that, especially if you get into the higher SMART scores and you don't want to drop down or you're taking a test or something. All right, in this case, we do in fact know our radius, but what we don't know is our height. Now that it's substituted, we need to start solving. Well, before I can solve for h, I better simplify that side. And this time I do have an exponent that I can deal with. So because our exponent's not attached to our variable, we in fact know the radius, we have to go back to dealing with the exponent first, following that order of operations. They're off with 8.1 squared. It's going to take me a second to write this, but that's okay, because it'll give you guys a moment to do the same. So 3.14, and then 8 1/10 squared is 65 61/100. Now that we've dealt with the exponent, let's go ahead and do our multiplication. So multiply that by 3.14. We get 206, and I am not going to round any of my decimals until the very end. What that does is that helps prevent rounding error, because if you round too early, then your answer will be slightly off. You'll have a slight rounding error. So it's best practice whenever possible to wait until the very end to round, because then that answer will be closest to the exact amount. Okay, we need to get h by itself. Let's divide here. I'm doing all this writing. You guys may even already have the answer, which if so is amazing. All right, I'm going to be very careful when I type this into my calculator. So 885.8. Oops, see, look, I already lost 2. 0.86622 divided by 206.0154. And because I waited till the end to round, everything lined up beautifully, and we simply just get 4 3/10 is our height. So the height is 4 3/10 meters. Okay, you have just a couple more practice problems. Go forth, try them out. And as always, guys, if you need something, send me an email. I am happy to help.